What is the Independent Budget Office, and why is it important to the people of New York? This is David R. Jones, President of the Community Service Society of New York, an organization devoted to improving the lives of the poor. Today, as host of the Urban Agenda and a member of the advisory board for the IBO, I will be speaking with Douglas Criscitello, IBO Director. Mr. Criscitello is an expert in governmental finance, having worked at the U.S. Small Business Administration, the city's Office of Management and Budget, and the Congressional Budget Office. Doug, tell the people what the IBO is. I think it's one of the best-kept secrets.
Right. Well, let's step back a little bit, back
Sure.
to 1989. The city charter was revised at that time. The old Board of Estimate was done away with. And the charter crafters at the time felt that there was a need to make other elected officials in the city more equal to the mayor. And clearly the mayor would assume substantial additional powers under the city charter. And as part of that effort to make these other elected officials more of a co-equal partner, there was a decision to create an independent budget office to provide nonpartisan information to those elected officials so that they were on a more level playing field with the mayor's office, who has a huge staff, a 300-person Office of Management and Budget, a large Office of Operations, and his immediate staff, in addition to all of the mayoral agencies. So by creating an independent budget office, the logic was that these other elected officials, principally the city council, would have additional information. And there's really a second part to the justification for the IBO, which is to open up the city's budget process and make it more accessible to all New Yorkers, not just elected officials.
So an ordinary citizen can get information out of the IBO?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're one of the few places in government, period, and this isn't a knock on New York City government, but we're one of the few places where if we get a phone call or an email from a member of the public, we take it as seriously as if it's from the mayor himself. Probably even more seriously, actually.
At the end of the program, maybe we'll put a strip of the phone number for people out there. But tell me the kind of questions people might ask, or the council might ask.
Let's start with the public.
Right.
You know, we get a lot of questions from folks just wondering where their tax dollars are going. And one thing that we've done is we've created an interactive website on the internet that allows taxpayers to log on to our website and punch in how much they paid in state, city, or federal income taxes, hit a key, and get an itemized receipt showing exactly
where their money went.
And actual dollars and cents. If you're curious about how much you paid for city libraries or national defense, interest on the national debt, state prisons, in actual dollars and cents, you can go into this site and find that out. And we've had about 10,000 people do that
who are interested.
Yeah. You know, that's one thing. Another thing that we do is to interact with the public through online town hall meetings that we have. We're conducting one right now on the mayor's executive budget, where you can once again get onto our website and ask questions. You know, and a number of the questions that we're getting are fairly complex, and they're good questions.
Now, what is for those of us who don't know, the mayor's executive budget, how often does that come out, and what would it contain?
The way that the city's budget is adopted is that the mayor submits a preliminary budget in January, which is his plan for the coming fiscal year and how the city should spend its tax dollars. The city's budget is $30-some-odd billion, very large. In January, he submits an initial plan. The city council considers it for a couple of months, provides a response back to him, and then in April, he submits an executive budget, which is kind of his final plan. Once again, the council considers that, and they negotiate an adopted budget, which is generally completed by the middle of June. And the city's quite good at completing its budget on time.
We don't have
unlike
the state's
state.
problem.
No, not at all.
Okay, and that process is currently in the works.
It's in the works. The city's fiscal year starts July 1st,
Right.
so they'll have it done by then.
And this kind of town hall you're having would actually go into the details of that budgeting process?
Yeah, I've been really impressed, quite frankly, by the questions that we've been receiving from the public. Really good questions. How do we fund our schools? How do we pay our teachers? Where does that money come from? What are the fiscal implications of building new stadiums for the Yankees and Mets?
Of course.
Great questions, which we're.
So with the latter one, how does that come out? What is the consensus?
We've just issued a report on public subsidization of professional sports stadium construction, and
Right.
we looked specifically at the Yankees and Mets, and there's quite a bit of confusion out there about how important these teams are from a financial perspective
Right.
to the city. I mean, clearly they're important from a psychic perspective, a civic pride perspective. And I'm a big baseball fan. I would not be happy at all if the Yankees were to leave
Right.
this area. But in deciding what to do to keep them here, we need to understand what the fiscal implications are of the teams. And they do contribute to the local economy. Our estimates are that both teams contribute about $300 million to our $350 billion annual economy.
Right.
It's significant.
But
it's,
not.
Yeah, it's less than 1/10%.
It's always been my concern that perhaps applying the sort of stadium rule that seems to be sweeping the country, that you have to maintain a stadium, really doesn't quite apply to a world city. I don't think anyone knows who plays for Paris, for instance.
I think that's an excellent point. And what we've seen, we've looked around the U.S.
Right.
And what you see is, at least recently, in bigger cities like San Francisco, the public isn't providing much in the way of funds to help build those stadiums. It's private money going into those deals. But in some second-tier cities, if you look at an Arlington, well,
we have to be careful here.
Okay, you're right.
I alienate enough people
Just
with
smaller.
these shows.
By that I only mean smaller.
We love Arlington, by the way.
Right. But you're seeing, Arlington contributed a lot of money to its
Right.
its stadium, a lot of public money.
Well, I'm still grieving over the Dodgers. I grew up only a stone's throw from
Right.
Ebbets Field. I felt it was one of the great betrayals of all time, so I understand that.
Right.
But
they are
clearly.
private businesses, and we can't lose sight of that.
Now, it hasn't been smooth sailing. I think many of our viewers may recognize that there's been a dispute that's been going on between the IBO, the Independent Budget Office, and the Mayor's Office. Could you describe what that entails? What's going on here?
Well, one thing I'll say for the mayor, he's been consistent in his opposition to the Independent Budget Office. He hasn't wavered. He opposed it. Early on, when he was a candidate, I guess he made some overtures that it might be a good idea. But once he was in office, he has stated that he feels, and I'll use kinder words than he uses, but he's felt that the office duplicates what a number of other entities in town do. And he has worked rather aggressively to try to kill us off. We're not included in his budget. I mentioned his executive budget earlier. Although the charter requires IBO to be funded at not less than 10% of his budget office. That 300-odd person budget office that I mentioned earlier, we have about 35 analysts, so we get about 10% of that. He hasn't put us in the budget, which the city's operating under a court order to fund the IBO.
Right.
So if we're not put back in the budget and he is unsuccessful in his efforts to kill us off, we must be funded or the city would be held in contempt of court. Right.
And, obviously, and I want to be on the table that advocates, particularly those around the poor, have been particularly concerned with the mayor's office refusal to grant data, for instance, on what's happening to the people who are leaving welfare. Do they get jobs? Do they end up in worse shape than they were before? We need that information to understand what's going on.
And we have been doing quite a bit of work in that regard. We actually issued one of the first reports in the country, if not the first, on what the effects of federal welfare reform would be on a municipality. But just going back for a second to what I refer to as the perils of IBO, I failed to mention earlier in the show when we talked about why IBO was created, that the City Hall essentially blocked the creation of the agency, although it was authorized in 1989 and approved by voters.
Right.
It wasn't funded until the beginning of 1996. So we've only been around for 2 years.
So even the prior administration had trouble with this idea.
Right.
Right.
Although I think former Mayor Dinkins and former Mayor Koch would agree that IBO is a good idea. But now we have been up and running for 2 years, and we're steadily building a pretty strong client base, and it's growing and growing every week.
Right.
From getting additional city council members to use those, to civic groups, to members of the public. And I just hope that we are given a chance to show how we can make a difference to all New Yorkers in the years ahead.
Now, you say the mayor's trying to block you going ahead. How would that be achieved?
Well, he's pursuing legislation in Albany. The state can authorize. You can only change the city charter in one of two ways.
Right.
Either a referendum, or the state can change it for you, or give you the authority to change it, because the city is an instrumentality of the state. They're not going to get a referendum through. I mean, we're here, the New York Times has called us the People's Budget Office, and I think if they were to put a question on the ballot about IBO, I think people would vote for it.
Right. We're
here to open up the government, to make it more democratic. I can't imagine the public being against that. And we only cost $2.5 million. It's next to nothing in this large city budget. But the legislative route, the mayor has been successful in getting legislation introduced in both the state Senate and the state Assembly.
Right.
And it's troubling. It's troubling. We don't know what happens in last-minute horse trading that happens up in Albany. We could wake up one morning and find out, yeah, there was a deal cut in Albany. IBO, you're dead. And it's it's something we're working, and we're getting our boosters behind us to help us out.
Who is supporting the IBO now in terms of elected officials at this point?
There was recently a letter circulated in the state assembly, and we had by Assemblyman Gottfried, and we got 2/3 of the city's delegation to the state assembly signed the letter in strong support. Assembly Speaker Silver has also, at least at the staff level, they've expressed to us that they're supportive of the IBO, and hopefully that will serve as a strong shield against these assaults.
Before going through some of the audits you're currently conducting, there's another problem you're having with the city administration, which is even getting the data to analyze.
Right.
What's with that?
Well, the city charter is very clear. The IBO is authorized to secure such information, data, and estimates as IBO deems necessary to carry out its job. The mayor's office doesn't agree with those words and has forced us to go through the Office of Management and Budget for any information that we want. So the institution that we were really set up to be a counterweight to, OMB,
is controlling.
Our competitor decides what information that we get, and we feel that's entirely inconsistent with the city charter, and we've sued the mayor over it.
Mm-hmm. And you've had a couple of lawsuits with this mayor, and I think the outcome has always been the courts have vindicated
yeah,
the
I think there's been a total of 7 lawsuits now. One is pending. There might be another one pending soon, but we're undefeated. We're 6-0 right now, so we feel pretty good about
let's
that.
get to the meat of what you do. What are the current large audits that are going on, or some that have come out recently?
We're particularly concerned right now with taxes in the city. There's quite a bit of work underway at IBO. The mayor has proposed to reduce sales taxes, to eliminate or to extend an exemption on property taxes for co-op and condos. There's been an awful lot of discussion on reforming the city's personal income tax. The Speaker of the City Council has a proposal, as does the mayor. So we're doing quite a bit of work on that front right now.
Right.
We're also about to update our welfare reform report, which we issued now. It's You know, the federal law has been in place, almost in August it'll be 2 years. And we want to take a hard look at it again, 2 years later. What's happened? Clearly the last 2 years have been, you know, from an economic perspective, pretty much couldn't have been better. And caseloads have continued to fall. But we want to take a look at, you know, some of the child care and workfare related costs and try to get a better sense of where these costs might go in the event of an economic downturn.
Which is precisely, I served on the Health and Hospitals Corporation Board in my closing days before I was not reappointed by the mayor, though I had sued the mayor as well, so not too surprising. There was a great concern because the welfare legislation specifically excluded new immigrants, legal immigrants, from certain types of medical supports under Medicaid. Just as I was leaving, there had been a 23% increase in the number of uninsured coming to Health and Hospitals Corporation facilities, and that was a red flag because you only get about 25 cents back on the dollar per patient for that kind of care, per dollar spent. So we were worried if there was going to be a sharp increase in people who had no coverage under Medicaid or under welfare, where would they end up except at public facilities? So it's
well, and I think you raise a good point. That one thing that hasn't been discussed all that much in terms of welfare reform is that there's been a tremendous cost shift to state and local governments from the feds. Everything's great right now because the TANF block grant is based on caseloads from 1995 when they were generally higher nationwide and in New York specifically than they are now. So there's this TANF surplus that you hear about and everyone's happy. But if caseloads go up dramatically, which they will in an economic downturn, you know, that block grant is capped and all of the additional costs will be borne by the city and state ultimately.
It reminds me of trying to deal with my kids' allowance that they particularly like to spend right away, with the notion that it'll always be good times here, so you'll spend it in a flash. I get concerned, obviously, that elected officials, knowing that they're leaving office, will be able to wave their fingers saying, I had it all under control, the economy was great. And then when things come apart, they'll blame it on whoever gets left with ultimately catching this thing.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, the city has improved in so many ways in the last several years, and you know, a great deal of it is due to the economy. And it's really unfair to go back to the very early 90s when we were in a recession and project some of the costs, and you know, the cost of the city budget at that time was rising, and yeah, it's going to. When the economy goes down, more people are on unemployment, more people are on welfare, and complicating matters, less revenue comes in. Fewer people are working, fewer people are paying taxes. So, yeah, clearly, if you're in office right now in New York, you've benefited from the economy.
Now, the two streams of requests you get, you mentioned the public, and we'll make sure that number and website gets listed. How do the elected officials, which category of elected officials is allowed to make a request? And then what sort and how broad in scope?
Well, the elected officials that we help are the city council, the public advocate, the city controller, the borough presidents, and community boards, which aren't really elected officials. But you know, it's a very broad group.
Yeah.
We have been pointing a lot of our effort toward helping city council members. You know, that's the first place that we'd like to make some inroads. And we've also been doing quite a bit of work with the public advocate who, you know, a small plug for Mark Green, he asks exceptional questions. You know, it's important. Not only the answers that we give are important, but the questions that are asked are also very important. And he's asked some great questions about, you know, how are the working poor taxed in New York City? What effect did the reduction in the hotel occupancy tax have on tax revenues, and what are the implications for other tax reduction proposals that are being floated? But we've also recently been getting a great deal of very good questions from city council members. You know, Andrew Aristoff is a great example of a sitting council member who is just really taps into our talent, and I think his use of IBO has been modeled. But I also want to put in a word for the new council members. I've been extremely impressed by the caliber of the council members who just took office here this year, who won office in, I think there's 11 new council members. And, you know, I have found their enthusiasm and intelligence to be exceptional. And they have sought us out quite a bit. I think because they're new, because we're new, I think there's kind of a natural simpatico there. And so far that relationship has been fantastic.
There's another potential problem in the winds, to get back to some of them, that there's a talk about a new charter Charter Revision Commission being established. I know that for a while there were talk of competing charter review commissions. How would that impact on the IBO?
Well,
if at all.
If the mayor had any say, clearly IBO would be deleted from any new city charter. You know, it's unbelievable. You mentioned earlier that I had been down in Washington,
right,
where I worked at both the White House Budget Office and the Congressional Budget Office. Two forces that you think might be adversarial to one another. They're not at all. I mean, the professional work that's done in Washington is viewed collegially and in a very non-judgmental way. You might disagree with the findings, but it's not attacked. The work that we've done here in the city, which I think is of equal caliber to the work that I was involved in down in Washington in both of those organizations, is just, if our findings are at odds with anything at all that the mayor has to say, you know, we're suddenly called second and third rate, our methodology is disputed, and in no reasonable way, just really, you know, I would characterize it as hitting below the belt on a number of occasions. The mayor, he's opposed our existence, although we don't work for him. Quite frankly, he should have nothing to say about this. He is not a client of ours. We don't report to him. We work for other elected officials in town. So to the extent that he gets angry and jumps up and down and calls us names when we issue reports, he can do that. But I don't think his criticism has been fair, and I don't think he really has any business in our existence.
I think I must say that he perhaps has fears. I mean, your report, obviously, or beginnings of a report on the Yankee Stadium may not be vital, clearly contradicts a political position he's taken. So I guess he does fear having this kind of...
yeah, I mean, it's not really our job to
criticize or not.
And we don't.
Right.
I mean, I think a proponent of building a Yankee Stadium on the west side could take our report and find some things in there
to justify.
Exactly. And interestingly, we did reports on both the School Construction Bond Act this past November and the Environmental Bond Act the year before that. And I was very pleased that proponents of both sides of those issues were using our report. Because they would go in, they say, hey, there's a good point that IBO is making on our behalf. And I think our report all of our reports have been very even-handed. And I think we've actually bent over backwards to make sure that it doesn't appear that, you know, we're supporting someone and blasting someone, because we're not at all.
Now, I guess one of the difficulties you're running into is it really hasn't penetrated the public's consciousness. It hasn't gotten down to the grassroots. How are you going to deal with this problem? How is this going to be made important to people trying to get through, pay the rent, you know, go to the job, and worry about the IBO? I mean, how do you make this case for yourself?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, you know, the mundane world of the city's budget is not something that's at the forefront of everyone's mind.
And rightfully so.
Right. But, you know, we do serve an important purpose. I think as a citizen of New York City, you want your elected officials to understand what they're doing. And I'm not implying that they don't now, but we're here to enhance their understanding. We want people to understand that if you cut the sales tax on clothing or eliminate it altogether, that's a good thing. Clothing's cheaper, but it costs a few $100 million. That's what we're here to do. We're here to show that. Another entity that we haven't really talked about very much is the media. People pick up the New York Post, the New York Times, the Daily Newsday every day in New York City, and they read stories, they glance them over, and you want that reporting to be the best that it can be and to be the most accurate. And probably one of our principal clients over the past couple of years has been the media. I mean, we help them untangle difficult budget stories and difficult stories on difficult programmatic stories involving city agencies. And we're doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work, working with editorial boards, working with beat reporters to help them really uncover stories and help them get their stories right.
Well, I guess it becomes a question then, I think, with so much goodwill coming out of the media, and basically, do you think that you have a serious problem in the State Assembly? Yeah?
I mean, I don't want to dismiss it. The word that we've heard from Speaker Silver's office is encouraging, although I don't know that
Have people been writing letters?
No, I mean, that would help. That would help.
Well, you
I mean,
can't
the elected
say that,
officials.
but I'm able to say anything.
Yeah, the elected officials. I mean, we can't lobby. I mean, so we're just out there just doing our job, hoping everything takes care of itself to some extent. We're trying to get the word out about IBO. I spoke before a fairly large group recently, and people in the audience by the time I was talking were pretty fired up, and I was up there. We're here to open up the budget to you all and to make sure that you understand it. And after my talk and the Q&As, people wanted to know why they didn't know about IBO, and shows like this, I think, are helpful to get the word out about it.
It's interesting. This will ultimately, the mayor is in the last stages of his second term. There'll be a new mayor, potentially a Democratic mayor, who may be just as upset with having his information revealed. This could literally be the kind of nonpartisan good government which will not appeal to one party or another, and therefore we should get public across the political spectrum.
Yeah, I don't think it's partisan. I think it's more personality.
Yeah.
I think, we need a mayor. I think it's important for any elected official to understand that the people own the government. It's absolutely their government, and we're here to open it up to you.
Thank you very much, Doug. The people of New York, in their wisdom, voted for an independent budget office, an IBO, under the charter reform in 1989. Since then, the city administration, particularly the current mayor, has tried to cripple the IBO by preventing access to information and cutting its funds. City Hall clearly doesn't like to have anyone looking over its shoulder. That's all the more reason why the rest of us should fight hard to keep the independent budget office. It is our only hope of getting an unbiased evaluation of how well or how poorly the city is functioning. For the Urban Agenda, this is David R. Jones.
To comment on the Urban Agenda or for more information on CSS, contact Community Service Society of New York, 105 East 22nd Street, New York, New York, 10010. Area code 212-254-8900.